that I'm going to do what I think is right, whether it's popular or not, whether it gains friends or not, whether people think I'm not tough enough or not, because we live for an audience of one. And I think most of you in this room know what I mean by that. And if you live for an audience of one, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. So now let me tell you a couple stories about Fred really is tough enough, for those of you that don't know these stories. I'm in the Florida House of Representatives, and it's the last night of session. It's 8 p.m. We're supposed to close at midnight. And I hear about a bill that the conference, and if the House passes a bill over here, and the Senate passes a bill over here, and they're different, they go to conference. And conference has to make a bill that's one bill that comes back. You have to vote it up or down. You can't amend it. So that bill comes back to us, and it's the governor's corporate income tax cut, the number one priority of the governor. But in conference, a provision was put on that bill to give a tax cut to the Jacksonville Parimutuel facility, and nobody else. So, I'm not real shy. I go to my freshman colleagues and I say, I hate this stuff. I don't like it when they put provisions on at conference that you don't like, and you're forced to take them because you want the good stuff in the bill. If we accept this today, tonight, we'll have to do that for the next 7 years. They'll do that to us every year. They'll stick something on that bill. So I've got a half dozen freshmen with me that are going to vote against this bill. So I go to our speaker designate, that would be Richard Corcoran, who we had already anointed as the future speaker from our class, and I say, Richard, we're voting against the tax cut bill, and I want you to know that we're not against the tax cut, we're against the gambling provision. And his exact words were, get away from me. When you guys gather around me, leadership thinks I, Richard, am creating something, creating issues. So then Carlos Lopez Quintero, many of you know that he's our lieutenant governor today, he was the majority leader. He comes up and he says to Richard, he says, what's this about you not voting for the corporate income tax bill? And I insert myself between them and I say, it's not Richard, it's me. I'm saying I'm not voting for that bill. He says, you're not voting for the governor's number one priority, the corporate income tax? You're willing to be graded down by the Chamber of Commerce, by American Conservative Union, by Americans for Prosperity? They're all going to grade you down because you didn't vote for that bill? I said, I'm not voting against the corporate income tax cut. He smiles and relaxed. I'm voting against the gambling bill. He stomps off. He's not happy. The majority leader's not happy that a group of freshmen are voting against the governor's number one priority. Well, session wasn't over yet. It's supposed to be over at midnight, and we hadn't passed the budget yet. So in the Senate, they passed an extension for budget bills only. So guess what? In the House, we found a way to take the good stuff, meaning the corporate income tax cut, out of that bill and amend it onto a dead budget bill. We passed that budget bill with the corporate income tax cut on it. We left the other bill behind, and then we sine-died, which means we shut down, and we sent that bill over to the Senate. And the Senate had no choice. They had to either vote for the corporate income tax cut bill without the gambling provision or vote it down. And of course they voted for it. So everybody won because one guy was willing to say no. Now, many people will tell you Fred was ineffective because I didn't pass a bunch of bills. I filed a pension bill. There were 5,000 complaints. The first day we filed that bill. Over 5,000 emails. We had death threats at the Capitol and death threats in DeLand where my office was. Because, just like President Trump, I hadn't read his book, but evidently I learned something from somebody. We started way over here, knowing we wanted to end up here. That's what you do in negotiations. You start over here if you want to end up here. So we had everything in that bill, and oh my goodness, did people go ballistic. But now, Florida has one of the best pension plans in the country, one of the least unfunded liability of any state in the union. Think about Chicago and Illinois, think about California. You've all read about their pensions. Last thing I'll tell you, How many of you know about property tax? That if the value is 10 and the rate is 1, that's 10. If the value goes up to 11 and you keep the same rate, that's 11. That's a 10% increase in revenue. By definition, the state of Florida calls that a 10% increase in the tax. But Tallahassee didn't want to do that. They wanted to say, no, that's not an increase in tax, we're keeping the same rate. We want the locals to have to live with the rollback rate, but we don't want to do that here. So I'm the only one that stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and said, if we do this, we must call it a tax increase. They didn't want to call it a tax increase. They didn't want to go on record as raising taxes. So we got the House of Representatives not to accept it. Don Gates, Chairman of Education Appropriation at that time, former President of the Senate, he agreed with me. He said, Fred, you're right. We've been telling the locals that they have to go to the rollback rate, or they have to go to 0.9 if it's now 11, 0.9 times 11.99, add a few to make it come out even. In other words, they have to roll it back to come out even. So we got the legislature to go to the rollback rate, which saved $428 million the first year, $440 million the second year, over $300 million the third year. So I've now saved you over $1 billion in property tax, because most people don't know that Tallahassee legislates. Tallahassee legislates the required local effort property tax. Most people don't know that. Why do you want to send Fred to Washington? I have a proven record of standing up for Ormond Beach for 8 years. When I left, we had millage for renewal and replacement. Nobody had ever done that before. I said, if we buy something, we're going to keep it up. If we can't afford to keep it up, we shouldn't buy it. When I got to Tallahassee, I said, we're going to reform pensions, growth management. You know, Ormond Crossings, that Lock Burton, thank you, Lord, for Lock Burton and his family. They're building a 135,000 square foot building at US 1 and 95 that's going to employ about 750 people in Ormond Crossings. I started on that project when I got elected. The first thing I did was call Frank Bruno, who was chairman of the county council, and I said, we're going to meet together. The county council and the city commission, it's never been done before or since, and we're going to plan that. So we planned it, and we finally built it. And so the good thing about that is it shows that if you have a good plan, you stick to it, and you stay with it, and you do whatever it takes to get that accomplished. That's economic development. Get government out of the way and let the private sector take over. So when I went to Tallahassee, I was ticked off at what the state was trying to get us to do at Ormond Crossings. So we got rid of the Department of Community Affairs. I called them the Growth Gestapo. We got rid of those regulations. So what's President Trump done? 22 regulations eliminated for every one they've put in. That's awesome. That may very well be one of the best things he's done, is get rid of all these excess regulations. The tax decrease is great, but most businesses will tell you, if you get the regulations out of the way, and if you make it streamlined so I know exactly what I have to do to build or to create a business, and then don't change it on me. Just tell me what the regulations are, tell me what I have to do, and don't change it, let me go do it, they'll succeed. So that's what I want to do, is I want to have somebody like me, who is just like all of you, go to Washington, that is not trying to build a career. I don't hide the fact that I'm not 30 years old. I'm not going to build a career. I've had a wonderful career as a dentist. I love what I do. I've been very blessed. I want to go to Washington. I want people to go. I want people from all over our country to go to Washington with the idea that we want to make a difference. When we've made that difference, come home. It's called a citizen legislature. That's what it was designed to be. So I need your help to fight against the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that will be against us. There are two other Republicans in the race that have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, most of it from themselves. And one of the opponents, his first fundraiser was in Washington with a bunch of lobbyists. I'm sorry, that's not who I want to send to Washington. Forget the fact that I'm in this race. I don't want to send somebody to Washington whose first fundraiser is with a group of lobbyists in Washington. We are trying to drain the swamp, not send somebody up there who's a part of the swamp. So we're never going to have the kind of money these guys do, but we have people who know I'm honest, people who know I have a record that you can check. I believe that what we have is the ability to get people energized, that we want to send somebody to Washington who is going for the right reasons, and that's to simply represent us. I'm not going to be somebody. I already am. I've loved what I've done in my community. I've been very successful in my career. I don't need to be somebody. I want to do something, and to do something, I need your help.